Good evening. It is 6 o'clock according to my time. I'll go with that time. I looked up at the clock up there. So I'll call the meeting of Truth and Taxation to order. All the commissioners are present. The Truth and Taxation meeting was enacted by the Minnesota State Legislature in 1988 to enhance public participation in the Minnesota property tax system.
Let it slide.
The purpose is to provide a fair and objective forum for property owners to appeal their valuation or classification. These appeals are only for the current year. We know you have reviewed the assessor's data, and this evening you may provide evidence of recent sales or recent appraisers to us. When you are called, please come up to the desk that has the microphone. And you already are, if you haven't signed in, there'll be a paper there for you to sign in and give your information. You'll state your name and your case. Be prepared to answer questions by the county board. This meeting will be conducted in a fair and impartial manner. The county board listens to all appeals and takes time for the consideration of all that is presented. We will address each presentation individually, and you will have 5 minutes to do your presentation. So whomever want to be first, step up to the table with the microphone, please.
We have Tim White up first.
I was finding the numbers because these two parcel 40-acre 40s were combined. So I'm reviewing what information you have. I went into the administrator's office to make a better map. And, but I guess you didn't receive that.
They did. Actually, that was handed out by, she got it to give it to her.
Oh, yeah, okay, so they do have a copy of the black and white.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a critical one, because I wanted to simplify this. There's so many different issues that I certainly couldn't cover them all in 5 minutes. The state of Minnesota doesn't consider assessors to be infallible, or we wouldn't be here. And so I hope you're going to listen to what I have to say as my perspective, different from the surveyors, and use your own judgment, and also whether this information that I have to present would change the value of that land. When I tried to simplify it, I finally today, I used this black and white map that David Demmer had prepared in 2015, I think. That's when I think that Frank Moe asked him to go out and look at the land. Now, I don't think he looked at all the land, because I think I talked to him, and he didn't cross the river. It's hard to get to this piece, both of these pieces. Anyway, and as it says, generalized buildable area of white property. It's not fully accurate. He missed a few critical things. On this map, I drew in some lines. For example, in addition to what he considered these to be buildable areas. So in the top right corner, that land is just as steep as the steep slopes that he considered unbuildable, and it goes down to a ravine, which probably last night had water gushing down it. I got 2 inches of rain, and this ravine fills with water. So I don't consider that, I wouldn't consider that to be buildable. And then to the east side, I also drew a line showing another ravine. which goes through the middle of what David considered to be possibly buildable. And on each side of that ravine, the slopes are very steep. Another thing that happened is that in between, when I entered this land in the SFIA program, do I need to explain that? SFIA program?
Yes.
So I think it was around 2005, thanks to our senator especially, who was Tom Back. They set up this program to allow forest land owners to enroll subject to a covenant which prohibited any development. Part of the idea was to encourage more sale of timber, and also to prevent this kind of building pressure and subdivision pressure that was it's bad on really the nature of wild lands. If people's taxes go up and then they divide in order to be able to afford their taxes. Under the SFI program, you receive a payment from the state of Minnesota, administered by the Department of Revenue every year, based on the statewide property taxes on forest land. But you're prohibited from developing, from building, even roads on the land that is included in that SFIA. And when you enroll in it, it's all of your land. And if you violate the terms of that in one small place, they're going to come after you for everything. Like they give the example of some timber company that had like 5,000 acres, and they made a small mistake, and then Department of Revenue went after them for the previous 8 years of payments on all 5,000 acres. Anyway, is that enough explanation on that? Okay, so all of my land is enrolled in the SFIA program. There are a few places where I was able to exclude, thinking at the time that maybe I'd have a business with sled dog touring, and I could put up a wall tent on a platform or something like that. Well, that never happened. But I picked places that would be good for that, and I picked those places I wasn't thinking about building, and I wasn't thinking about the county zoning and where I could or couldn't build. This was a good place to set up a tent. And on these parcels here, sometime in between, Wayne Henchy, bless his soul, with his GPS and his obsession with quarter corners, relocated this quarter corners so that the boundaries changed. And as a result, what on the earlier map showed as that road, which is now called the Brule Valley Trail, moved so it's no longer touching my property. So anyway, back to this. There's two ravines there. So of what David Demmer thought, and he says generalize. He doesn't claim to have been perfect, and he's a waterman, right? He was a waterman. He wasn't a planning and zoning building permit man. But the only thing left is that really small piece on top of the cliff. And I haven't gone there to determine carefully, but I don't think that's buildable either, and it isn't on the Brule Valley Trail, so a person would need to have an easement to get there. Okay, back to the other side of the river. That side, the next section over is section 36. Like many townships in northern Minnesota, section 36 and section 16 were put in the school trust fund land program for the DNR to manage to generate income for schools. So that property there is a square mile of school trust fund land, and it's very unlikely that anybody could get an easement across there. So from that side of the river, my land would have to go a mile to reach Soderholm's Forest Service special use permit, where he has a road that he maintains under his own cost that then connects to Forest Road 308. Anyway, so I also drew in here in the bottom left corner of my land, that line is a sharp drop-off from the ridge into wetland. And people may not know this, but there's one classification of wetland called coniferous wetland. So from an aerial photo, you might see black spruce trees growing, but if you went down on the ground, you'd see moss that's a foot deep, and it's wet, even in the hottest weather. Anyway, that other part is coniferous wetland. And then the other line is another ravine where water flows off from the ridge. So thinking that perhaps when I combine these properties, the assessor saw, now I have 80 acres with buildable sites and an access on the east side, some kind of access because it happens to be, it's close to that Brule Valley Trail. But realistically, I don't think that's true. So my other document here, which I don't know if you have a copy of this, I'm sorry, it was written in pencil.
That's on the very last page of the packet that I.
We do.
On this, I tracked the assessed value of those 240s, which for, until this year, were separate. But I wrote down what that came to, the combined. So in 2022, combined value 75.9, 2023, 75.9, 2024, 87.2. But then this year, this is the one I'm really objecting to, when they were combined, instead of what you usually expect, that the price per acre would go down, instead, it went to 119,300, and the previous years is 1,000 per acre, 1,100, and now it's 1,500 per acre. And I know that having come to some of these other meetings, that the assessor talks about comparable, is that it? Is that the word?
Comparable.
Comparable. Well, that's a pretty vague term. What you really need to know beyond comparing is what are the key differences, what are the similarities.
Mr. White, I'll give you another minute.
Okay, quickly, I'm going down. I picked 3 other parcels of mine which have some strong similarities. Like one parcel, 300 acres on the Camp 15 road, that has probably half of it is wetlands, like this Brule River land wetlands. That's valued at $500 an acre. Another parcel, 120 acres on Magny Park that doesn't have good access. It's 3/4 of a mile on an easement. That's valued at $750 per acre. And then another parcel on the Casper Hill Road, which has lots of building sites, and it's on the Casper Hill Road, $800. So I think this $1,500 an acre is an awful big jump without any justification, considering that realistically there are no building sites.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Bob Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Tim, for coming and bringing some information. I did provide the commissioners with some information myself. It's in that little binder with your name on it there. If you want to look at it, it's in the binder to your left. So effectively, what I've got put together here is just a little bit of rundown on the history. I know that, in communicating with Mr. White this year, he had brought up the previous tax court stipulation that was settled in 2017 with the previous assessor. So what I have is a couple, I have a photo from up at I don't know if that's what Mr. White referred to as the tent site, but this is up on the east side, the larger of the areas on the David Demmer map, where it's outlined and showing, approximate buildable areas. That is the information that we based the tax court stipulation on back in 2015. I haven't ever seen another map where the property lines have shifted, and I think that with this map that was provided by a county official, I have to take it for its value, is that there are potential build sites on either side of the river. You know, there's not a lot of sales of properties like this where, you know, it's elevated up on a ridge line, you know, looking over a valley like that. They're few and far between. There is an active listing down in that area right now, and it's been on for some time. You know, it's a rustic off-grid cabin. It's a rather large log home cabin on the Brule River Road. And, you know, the assessment that we have on it is right about what their asking price is currently. They had recently dropped their price from, I think, $400 to $375 on that property. So, you know, that's kind of looking at our measurement of assessment. And, you know, it's one of those things that we have to look at is where are those sales lining up with the actual assessments. So, you know, I have the David Demmer map that was also provided by Mr. White. I have that photograph from up on the ridge line over the Brule River Valley. You know, in that MLS listing, it talks about how this is, you know, some of the most unique land in all of the county, and, you know, highly sought after and very rarely comes available. That property is still active. It hasn't sold yet. I do also have the value history of Mr. White's two properties, the ones that were combined that make up this 80 acres now. And I guess if Mr. White, if you'd take a look at that, the numbers that I have on this, it's the second page in your packet that I gave you. Yep, the second page in there, it shows the value going in 22 from 75.9 into 23 was 94,400. And then in 24, 19,300, and this year 123,700. So those were different from the numbers that I think you had added up. And I did just double check it in the software, and it is matching up to what I have on the paper here. So, you know, I have to ask myself, do I think that one or potentially two build sites over that Brule River Valley is worth $123,000? We do have it factored into our assessment where there's marshlands, wetlands. In fact, the majority of the property is on the assessment record as wetlands, but wetlands in Cook County sell for $800 an acre currently. So that's what we have them valued at across the county, is $800 an acre. River frontage adds value to a property. We've seen it in sales, and in fact, I provided two examples of that in a side-by-side comparison on the third page. So underneath the blue line graph that shows the county's total value history, there's a comparison right in Mr. White's neighborhood. The off-river parcel sold for $1,100 an acre, and the on-the-river parcel sold for $22.69 an acre. And that, I didn't even take into account the fact that that non-river sale was 2 years later in a market that's appreciating. So if you account for that, it only further spreads the difference between the non-river and the river frontage, and shows that river frontage is truly in high demand. The parcel referenced here that sold for $90,000 in 2020 is a 40-acre parcel directly south of Mr. White's property. So this is, you know, roughly half the size of Mr. White's in total. On the same bluff overlooking the river, it sold for $90,000 before we had this, you know, 80% increase in market value since the pandemic. So those are just a couple of data points that, you know, when you don't have a perfect comparable, you just have to look at data points and say, what is the data suggesting? Is that number of 123 wrong, or is it supported in the data? And, you know, I talked about it with my appraisers today, and, you know, when you don't have that perfect comp, sometimes you're saying, well, maybe it could use a, you know, $10,000 or $20,000 reduction, and then you think about it, and it's like, well, yeah, but then there's that 80 acres that sold right off of the Superior Hiking Trail for $205,000 in 23, and, you know, that it's going to end up probably being one build site. It's not like they bought it to be subdivided. We oftentimes see people buy 40, 80, you know, 160 acre parcels and build one house on it or one cabin. So, you know, I think that the fact that Mr. Demmer has identified a potential build site or two, I will also point out that this map excludes the 50-foot setback all the way around the perimeter. If you look at it in the detailed map, you can see that. There are variances for bluff setbacks and side yard setbacks when you have challenges like this. In fact, I've heard Neva say it many times that when a property has a challenge with the setbacks, that's when they're more likely to get the variances approved. So, you know, we're valuing Tim equal with other properties that are like him. And, you know, that's how we got to the number. We have marsh discounts, we have elevation discounts. We offset some discounts when you have a view like that, because that is a multiplier in our assessment. So there's a lot of things going on. But, you know, I just have to put my real estate cap on and say, would somebody pay 123 for that? And I do think they would. I did reach out to the broker that Mr. White had worked with in the past, and I never got a response. I emailed yesterday. So, you know, I don't know where to go. I mean, I asked Mr. White to get BPOs prepared from a realtor, and I haven't seen anything yet. So, you know, here we are. Does the board have any questions or clarification?
Commissioner White?
The one building site that's down in the lower, to the east, that is floodwaters. I mean, just like we have said, that there are people with enough money that will buy whatever there is. This particular piece of property, if they're going to invest that much money, they could find nicer pieces of property and not have to deal with wetlands and wetland credits and then access to it. And when it floods, which it did, things float away. You know, there's, I think Tim has a canoe that he, for goofing around or for his, whatever, for the kid. And it floats away after a heavy rain if he doesn't have it tied up. So that is not a buildable area at all. So, and as far as the bluff goes, it, well, maybe I should try to walk up the bluff, but that does not have road access, and that will be, just like we are aware, just like when we talked about the bluff above Grand Marais, that there may be somebody at some point that would invest the money to buy a $200,000 10 acres so they could be up high. To get up high on this particular piece of property, it would be a significant investment to get there. And I think there are finer or better pieces of property with the same amount of money you could put into it, that would be less hassle to get to it. So.
Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. White and Bob, for the information. As I recall, we were talking about this in my first term as commissioner when David Demmer was assessing this, and I think the conversation was whether or not we were going to actually put our boots on and go up there and take a look and see, you know, what was, you know, reality in that regard. I think the thing for everybody when it comes to property tax and assessment, looking at all the influences, if there's a matrix in place so that it's equally applied in evaluation, and we'll often hear, you know, individuals say, well, how come that house and how come this site and whatever, and our security, I would say, comes in equal application so that there's integrity in our process. And I think reasonableness and good faith says that we come together to have these discussions to make sure that our assumptions and our application of policy is equal amongst all owners. The other thing that I recall when we did our quartile assessments back when we were not in compliance and we had to get in compliance or the state would take over, that we would send that down and here's how we rate these. And the state would come back and say, well, we think it needs to be 10% higher. That's something that I guess in my limited experience, I don't know how much negotiation and if the commissioners or other commissioners in the Arrowhead region would challenge, you know, those comebacks from the state that's saying you're going to have to bump it up. Well, we think we in good faith assessed, you know, it properly. Our willingness to listen, our willingness to actively respond to concerns and to explain how we arrived at our numbers, which Bob has certainly helped inform us on, are places to begin. I think as community working together and trying to see the reasonableness, sometimes we arrive at a conclusion that we're not necessarily happy with. And our stewardship responsibility as elected and hired individuals on behalf of citizens in the county, we want to get it right within the context of what our policies, procedures, state statute, and the state, orchestrates for us. My response to this would be simply that if it hasn't been done, that we would go the extra mile to try to make sure that the matrix that we're applying is equally applied here based upon assessment, and that we would, look at that. As to the significant increase that we're experiencing since the pandemic, the explanation for that is a bigger explanation across the board when we see significant increases in our taxes. So my encouragement in the short response is to say that we make a commitment to be sure we are hearing and we are understanding and we are explaining best that we can, and we come from a good place, so that the integrity of the process demonstrates that we choose to be good stewards and earn trust. And we need to negotiate on behalf of our citizenry when the requirements that are placed on us for compliance come outside of our jurisdiction to the extent that we can. We do it in PILT, we do it in a lot of other areas. We need to be active, respecting that, responsible, but to whatever we control so that other authorities have empathy and understanding and context for us is hugely important. Like I said, we were talking about this 10 years ago, and we're talking about it again, and I appreciate, Mr. White, your information and the spirit in which you're delivering it. Thank you.
Are there any other opinions, Commissioner Mills?
Can you speak to, well, first off, I have a question for Mr. White. Do you know how long the SFIA is in place for?
I entered 50 year.
Oh, okay. And so then my question is, how does that affect valuation?
Well, I excluded 2 sites. However, at the time, they weren't in these places that were buildable, that the assessor considers to be buildable. If they were, then the land could be sold, and the new owner could build there if it could meet the land office. And as I've pointed out here, despite David Demmer's general approach, you can see yourself from the contours that the only place that doesn't have a ravine and a steep slope is that middle piece, which is just a narrow strip on top of a cliff. And if a person did, if they could build there, if they bought it and built on it, they would be obligated to continue to respect the non-development conditions on the rest of that piece of land for, they've changed this a little bit, but I think it's probably 20 years. And I'm responsible for them to do that. If they violated that, then the state is going to come after me for $100,000. So I'd have to enter into a contract with them to do that. That is on the east side. On the west side of the river, you just can't get there. You'd have to, the DNR doesn't give out easements to reach land. They just say, tough, too bad for you. So it's just this one, in my opinion, it's just this one small sliver of land at the top of a cliff, which I don't think was buildable. Now, maybe what I need to do is go to the land office again and ask for a building permit and see what happens. Because David Demmer wasn't really inspecting for building permits. He was given a general, as he says, generalized. He was mostly looking at what was the issue at the time was wetlands.
You have a response, Bob?
Yeah, I can offer something up. So If we do want to pursue, having someone like Neva Maxwell go out and look at this property and look at the bluff setbacks, wetlands and things like that, we can certainly, make a change after the Board of Appeal and Equalization if the information we were using was in error. Otherwise, we would be looking forward to the 26 assessment. So I would be willing to have Neva walk the property if that's something that the Land Services Office is willing to do. Also with the SFIA, I know there was a lot of talk this year. I don't know if it made it into the legislation that they were going to change the payments on SFIA. Has anybody know what the final determination was there? Because with that, there was an opt-out for no penalty. And you could opt out and then re-enroll in another 50 years and re-describe that SFIA covenant. So, if there was a change in it, that's something to consider, but.
It's true, it's all at the legislature's discretion. Like,
And-
I have to pay with blood if I make an error. They
Right.
can just change it from one year to the next. And
So,
Yeah.
Mr. White, does that seem reasonable, what Mr. Thompson suggested?
yeah, I think that is. If it is like pending, that somebody who's more familiar with these building permit criteria would look at it. And if this is the only point of contention, you can drive there, close to there, on the Brule Valley Trail. Because that's the main place, is at the top of that hill, cliff, I would say, that you can almost reach on the Brule Valley Trail. And it would have a beautiful view over that whole valley. In fact, I think the property you referred to, was that Alexander?
Directly to the south of you.
Oh, not Tom Schroeder, he's another,
Wagner, I think.
the next one, Wagner, yeah, is he selling too?
No, it's sold in 2020. He purchased it in 2020 for $90,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, well, it was Deb, and she died, but I think her husband's still around. When she first bought that, she built a cabin at the top of that hill overlooking the whole valley, and I have to say, it's stunning. I have a photo that Stan Pelto took from his little plane that's looking out, and you'd think you were in Alaska or in the far north, because you can see areas of taiga and tundra and black spruce and the river flowing through it. And actually, I was happy with that lower, the 40 on the river, and I bought the 40 on the hill to prevent somebody from building on it, not knowing if it was buildable or not, but just in case, because at that time, I could get a good price on those 40 acres.
So is it reasonable, Commissioner Mills?
Yeah, so I was just wondering if there is a factor with the SFIA as far as the valuation is concerned.
So we do have the carve-outs of the SFIA covenant, and that permits 2 building sites. So,
Okay.
we do account for that in the assessment. If there was no build sites, we still actually don't reduce the value due to covenants like that unless it's specifically for a riparian buffer. And in this case, I think there could be an argument that it's a riparian buffer, but it has to specifically say that in the covenant. There is a statute that all conservation easements enrolled in after March 2013 cannot affect the assessed value unless it's for the protection of a riparian buffer. So with the build sites, there's really, that's what we're kind of saying here, is that there's
Yeah.
one really good build site and potentially a second on the west side of the river. But, that if something changes with, another look at it with our Land Services Department, I'm more than willing to change the way we're entering it into our assessment.
Is that reasonable? Commissioner Gamble?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the discussion. If a contract, a covenant agreement and we're mindful of anything that is restrictive in nature. If the property were to sell and there was a commitment that was made in a covenant or whatever, that there be no development, and that's the premise under which that covenant was made, then in the state of Minnesota, it's required, it used to be, that any encumbrance like that would have to be stated in the deed in its transfer, so that there would be a mindfulness of that. But again, sometimes we enter into agreements with the information that we have at hand, and then the state legislature changes on us, and then we're stuck with, the outcome of it. I think the commitment, again, in good faith, to want to be sure we get it right by taking a tour and having the people that make those decisions be involved, I think that's a good move.
So, Mr. White, we'll go ahead and have another look at it with Land Services, and we'll wait and see what you can work out, and that's been agreeable to the Commissioner Board. So, thank you very much for your attention to your details and all of that with your property.
Thank you. I appreciate your time and your reasonable approach.
Thank you,
And
sir.
Tim, I'll try to schedule something with Neva so that her and I can both walk the property together, if that'll work for our schedules. I know she's on vacation for what, another couple weeks?
Yeah.
They're way up in the Canada wilderness.
She's
Also find somebody who can tell you what are the conditions on that road. I think you do need a four-wheel drive.
Okay, thank you, Mr. White. We're going to move on. So we have the next appeal from Ken and Barbara Rindall. If you want to step up to the microphone there. You can go either side.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be before you and discuss this issue. So, first of all, I want to state that this parcel of property has been in our family lineage since the late 1800s. I am the fourth generation owner of this property, and I would like to continue to pass that on to generations beyond us. We're kind of having the same issues as Mr. White. We have 25 acres of our parcel that's non-accessible. We hear a lot of conjecture, we hear a lot of it could be, it might be, but when it all boils down to it, we'd actually have to pay an easement to somebody, to a landowner on the west side of the river, to be able to access 25 acres of our parcel. Now, I'm in real estate, I'm a real estate broker, I'm also a contractor, I've developed properties, and there's a lot that goes into developing land. You can't just say, well, we might be able to get 5-acre parcels out of this. There's a lot that goes into it. You have to plan, you have to zone it, you have to design, you have to perk test, you have to get surveys done. You're looking at, probably $35,000 to $40,000 an acre to parcel this off and make it 5-acre parcels. And if you look at the parcel of land that we're talking about here, we have an elevation drop from north to south of well over 100 feet. It does not make it a prime buildable site. The assessor is saying, well, you have river frontage. Yeah, we have river frontage. It's a 100-foot gorge. What good does that river frontage do? Doesn't do us any good when you're just listening to roaring water rapids. I mean, it's just, when you're dealing with land that's inaccessible, the values can't be as high as they are. I mean, we're seeing a double. I mean, this land is going from $205,000 to $400,000 value in 1 year. Where this land, these two parcels, the original Homestead 80 and this 80-acre parcel that we're talking about here, which was my grandfather's, and now I have it in my possession, was always valued lower than the north-south 80-acre parcels that directly adjoins it. And the reason being is my father came to a meeting like this years ago when he acquired this land in the late 60s. In the 70s, he came and talked to people such as yourselves about this, and they agreed. You can't access that land. It's landlocked from the west side. We're going to lower the value because we see your encumbrance here of being unable to access this property. So a lot of what Mr. White was saying kind of applies to our situation here as well. I mean, you can say, yeah, we might be able to get some buildable sites here. Did you take the time to perk the test? Can we get a well in there? Can we get septics in there? What's it gonna cost to run utilities into there? What good does it do to have acreage on the other side of the river when you can't access it? Those are all things that kind of would drive these values for this property. You have anything you want to input?
I just don't understand why everything is always a build site, a build site, a build site. Back when I first acquired land, it was, everybody wanted to save all the land. Now all of a sudden, everybody wants to make it a building site. And I've been taxed out of my properties before. And so that's why this is so far up north, I'm like, are you kidding me? Living out up there in the winter. We just walked it today and got eaten alive. So, I mean, you know, it's only worth what it's worth, and land, you shouldn't be taxed, you shouldn't have to have millions just to own something that was handed down to you. And I have went through this quite a few times with my family, and it just really hits me. Everything shouldn't be a development. And we could do it. If we really wanted to, we could probably find people. But why does everybody get to have $1-million houses on stuff? Can't anybody just enjoy some property?
Yeah,
That's the biggest thing.
Our whole goal behind this, and if you look, I mean, you look at the paperwork he put together, yeah, I didn't do a BPO because at first by their office, I was told it would be a conflict of interest. Up until last week is when he finally said, okay, yeah, I'll accept your BPO. I talked to 2 brokers here in town, and they all agreed with me. There's no comparables. There's nothing out there to show that there's an 80-acre parcel that was for sale that can give you a value that we can even come up with. In fact, one of the gals at the office that was kind of working with us here in town contacted the assessor's office and said, what are you using for comparables? Because we can't find anything. Only thing I can find is 4 parcels that were sold in the last 2 years. And yes, they're far away. But, so what do you use for a comparable? I got an 80-acre parcel that adjoins it that's now going to be half the value of this exact parcel.
And the banks don't want to give out loans on some of this kind of land.
Yeah, you're excluding who's available to purchase these types of
You'd have to
properties.
have cash.
Because it would be strictly a cash deal on something like this. And to go in there and development, the development cost would be astronomical to develop something like that.
Thank you for your explanation. I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a similar packet kind of put together. The first image is the overhead. I don't know if you're familiar with this area. It's up off of County Road 56 across from the Berglund Farm. The parcel that we're talking about is the southern parcel with the river frontage. The other parcel was kind of left out of the conversation this year. I know in the past, I'd seen Mr. Rindall at one of the other Board of Appeal and Equalization meetings, and we talked about both parcels at that time. One thing I do want to bring up that it isn't in the information here, but the assessment history of this, you know, going back to the late 2000s, like 2009, 2010, the value of that property was up at 190, 180,000. And for some reason, in 2016, the value was dropped to 82,000. So I don't know if that was due to an appeal or if it was just because the way the assessor was changing over land records at the time. But that significant drop is part of the reason why this is now doubling in value. And also the fact that this was in our quintile for this year, and we just started adding river frontage for the Devil Track River, because everything that sells along the river sells for more, improved or unimproved. I'm not valuing this as if it was 5-acre parcels. You're all familiar with the Sheaf parcel up on the bluff. Mr. Sheaf had an attorney draft up a document that was filed with the recorder's office, and that created 8 parcels. 10 parcels. The area that this property falls in is within the 2-mile buffer of Grand Marais, so the county's zoning ordinance doesn't have full effect. It's kind of like Tyson referred to it as a developer's no man's land. We all know that Cook County land is expensive to develop. Wells are not cheap, septic systems are not cheap, but people continue to pay a lot of money for that land to buy it and build on it. This land valued as an 80-acre parcel at $400,000, to me, Given that it is in the FAR3 district, which has 5-acre minimums, given that it's within the 2-mile buffer of town, it's on a plowed county road with power. I mean, this compared to the Sheaf parcel to a developer is gold. I mean, you all heard the arguments made by Sheaf's attorney. And you've seen the appraisal that was provided by Sheaf. That's a similar parcel that has a creek going through it instead of a river. But it has a lot more challenges with getting access into the parcel. And even without access to that parcel, you know, we see a value there from the county's perspective. It's part of it, the Bluff Hillside. But this parcel, I drove up there today. I drove up there a few weeks ago, and it was just too hazy to really get a good photo. Today it was a little better. It is a little hazy over the lake, but the second page you can see this is looking downhill, basically across the stretch of the shorter side of the parcel. And you can see that, you know, that whole area up there with the right tree clearing is going to have a view of Lake Superior. He mentioned that there was like a 100-foot drop in the parcel from north to south. That's what developers are looking for when you have that open hillside to the Lake Superior view shed. So I think the view is there, the river frontage is there, which again, we have sales that support the river frontages selling for more than non-river frontage parcels. I did provide 4 sales. I did provide those to Ken a couple weeks ago after I had taken over from Rachel was working on this appeal. And I looked at the sales that Ken provided, and, you know, you can see kind of the differences there. The parcels that I'm looking at, for the most part, are, you know, within 10 minutes of town. 2 of the 3 are in the FAR3 zoning. They are smaller, but, you know, 40 acres versus 80 acres. So, you know, literally all it would take is walking into the recorder's office and you could create 2 40s out of this. And there's no administrative subdivision process with this because it's within the 2-mile buffer. So the sales that I've got, you know, they're supporting this value, $59.75 an acre, $51.42 an acre, and that's in the FAR1 zone, and $62.50 an acre. And then the last comparable, which is going to be on the next page, is the Cascade River sale. That's on the Bolly Creek Road. That road isn't plowed in the wintertime. There's no power down that road. And, you know, a good portion of that 11 acres is on the inaccessible side of the river. So, you know, if you look at it and you break it down that way and say, well, only part of this parcel is on the roadside, it comes out to $10,000 an acre on the side of the river. So, you know, then last, Mr. Rindall provided these 3 sales. You know, 2 of them are in Hovland on unplowed roads, off-grid. One of these parcels has no road access at all. It's a landlocked parcel, and it's actually south of the Brule River. I don't even know how you'd ever get to it. They're just, to me, they're just not apples to apples when you're talking something up on the hillside, almost overlooking town. And then last but not least, this is the parcel that Commissioner Gamble visited with me and the appraisers a few, 2 months ago. It was bought, I'm assuming, for development because there are a few driveways cut into it. There's a road and a few driveways. It's an 80-acre parcel. That was a year and a half ago, the sale. It does have a view of Lake Superior there, kind of through trees. It's not necessarily seasonal, but not necessarily a panoramic view of Lake Superior. And that parcel back in July 23, sold for $300,000 or $37.50 an acre. Now, I didn't do a market adjustment on the sale since that sale because I didn't feel this was the best comparable. It is certainly comparable. It is a basis. And, when I saw this, I thought, well, the northern parcel that Rindall owns is actually valued less than $300,000, and this parcel is not as good as that one. That one has pasture land cleared. I don't know if they're still cutting hay on it, but, it's got some clearing out, and I even stopped and looked down that driveway today. There's a little clearing over the river valley. I mean, it's not anything like what Mr. White has on his property, but there are some spectacular build sites up there. We aren't valuing it as 35-acre parcels. If it was, it'd be well over in the millions of dollars. We're valuing it how somebody would pay for it if they were either going to buy it for development or buy it for farming or buy it for use. farmers actually have, because of the value increases, they have a special provision that if they register, they can get green acres, and that would reduce the taxable value of the farmland. So that's something that the Department of Revenue or the state of Minnesota legislature has created so that farms don't disappear. It's a deferred tax, and, if they sell it to a developer in the future, they have to pay back 3 years. But if they owned it for 30 years and then sold it, for 27 years, they'd get that deferred tax value. So unfortunately, I don't think we can apply that on this because this isn't used agriculturally. I'm not sure if it's used seasonally or if it's just, kind of sitting there empty and not being used at all, but it's got some clearing. One of them has a fire number and address. There was an old house. We have a picture of the old homestead that was on the property. It's been removed. And short of having a perfect comparable like you and your realtors discovered, you kind of look at points of information and have to ask yourself, do you think it's worth, $400,000 for a property like that?
And you have no plans on building or being a part of
Well,
it?
the one side is landlocked, so,
Yeah, we have no plans on building or developing that property. Like I said, it's been in the family since the late 1800s. One of our options was combining the PID numbers to make it one parcel. The other option was to go egg. I mean, we've got interested parties who would continue to hay the field itself. So there are those options, but, there again, I mean, valuing property that we can't access and valuing it based on a what if, it's just not fair to put that burden on the landowners in this county.
Any comments, Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you. Ken and Barbara, appreciate the information. It would be interesting to know of the parcels that we're using comparison that have sold, why they sold. And I don't know that we track that information, but let's just say that people that have generationally been in this community, when it gets to the point where they have no recourse, that they just say, I'm just selling, I got to get out, I can't continue. And that is a reality. It is probably the hardest thing that I faced in campaigning, is the reality that generational families are affected by the decisions we are making and the influence of legislatures at the state. And so when we look at, as an example, our work staff, if we have work staff that are leaving, exit interviews is to help us understand why people leave. And it would be true when people are selling. We use a comparison, but the other part of that is, why are they leaving? And if it's a matter of cashing out because they can no longer afford, that's a reality. It's an emotional thing, so oftentimes it's used as a battering ram to get what we want, but it is also a reality, so it cannot be ignored. I think this opportunity is an opportunity to come together in good faith to try to look at things from a reasonable standpoint, understanding the mutual respect and regard that we hear what you're saying, and we are willing to look at it, and we have to look at it in the context of what we are accountable for. And I can tell you that in my first term as commissioner, we hadn't done these quintile studies that were required. And the state said, if you don't do them, we will come up and we'll do them ourselves. And so it's best if we can have that jurisdiction in the context of the requirements that they put or place on us. If we make an assumption, it's a bad day when we've looked at lots of parcels, whatever, and so we just put the same cookie cutter assessment on everybody, and we're just saying, wait a minute, and so we want to go back and take a look and see. I appreciate what Bob does in trying to bring this board information to put things in context. But again, our commitment is to want to understand and to listen actively and to respond in a way that there's mutual appreciation for what we're held accountable to, the context in which we have to operate and make assessments to make sure that those metrics are properly applied. And that's why we have this discussion. So I'd encourage whatever we could do to make sure that we're getting it right.
And how high is ever going to be high enough?
Well, that's exactly right. And
We
yeah,
wouldn't dare put something on it right now. We wouldn't be able to afford it.
no.
The taxes would be too much.
The thing is that as we become more attractive, if we have 82%, 81% of our commerce is directly tied to tourism, and so we become attractive place like Breckenridge and other places around the world, those that have earned their money elsewhere and export it here to be able to purchase, we cannot compete with that. And so I think that elected officials need to be mindful of how do we keep the balance so we don't lose our identity and our generational families.
Any other comments?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I just want to respond to comments that Gary made. The use by the buyers or sellers of those comps that I provided, we actually do call and interview the buyers when they buy properties, every single sale. So we have two of those properties, 54-103-2100. We called and did an interview in September of '25, and they said that they were going to use it for bear land. The second one, we didn't do the full call because this property was sold by the state of Minnesota, the DNR. It was an auction property that they had gotten rid of off of their books, off the Pine Mountain Road. And the last one is 53-104-2400. That one, they also indicated they would use it as bear land, the buyers. So they're buying this land either for hunting or recreational use. They don't have plans to build immediately.
Because it's too expensive.
Commissioner Mills, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just going to ask a little bit about the valuation difference between that northern property and the southern property. Is the river, is that the
That's
deal?
what it is. So I think, let me check, we have the river frontage, I think, at $85 a foot. That was what we had extracted from the sales that were occurring compared to the non-river frontage sales.
And then is the west side of the river, is that factored in, or how is that factored in?
Let me just take a peek here. I don't have that parcel number written down, so I'm just zooming to it in the
Southern
map.
one?
Yeah, no, the northern one, 103.
Northern one
1100.
is 53-103-4100, or
1,100.
1100, sorry. The southern one's 40, yeah.
So that one, we just have it on as 77.6 acres, 2.4 acres under road, and that one's valued on our regular land tiers with no view factor or anything added to it. Now, the 4100 parcel, we have 2.2 acres as river, as actual underwater, so there's zero value on the, or $800, it's like a wetland value. We have 1 acre of road on that parcel, and we have $75 is the base rate for the river frontage because of the neighborhood adjustment, it adjusts up to $85 a front foot.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I was following, but did you address the west side, how that is factored in?
The west side, we don't have anything addressed on it. There is a trail, like a 2-tire track trail on the western side of the river frontage. We didn't discount it for not having access because there is some type of a trail access there. I know there's
Who's
probably
got a
not an
trail?
easement.
But we have to pay an easement to access it. You can say all you want,
don't
there's a
have a
trailer.
trail.
We don't own it. We don't own the access to it. It's the landowners who are adjacent to the west side. So that's inaccessible by us unless we pay.
They're
Unless-
walking in there
The
using
the
it.
people that are adjacent to that property are the ones walking in there using it.
Yeah, it's
They've
not us.
admitted it.
And that is part of the reason why I included the analysis of the Cascade River, how 11 acres of that is also on the other side of the river.
Have, go walk it.
Go
down to the river.
Go walk that ravine,
Yeah.
and see if you can get up and down that river.
I did it. I thought my life was in his hands. It was pretty treacherous.
So, I mean, it's certainly an option to to carve out that 25 acres and mark it as, you know, a lacking of road access.
That's a pretty big deal.
Commissioner Gamble?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to ask Bob if, in a similar situation where you have a tote road or whatever, a path, something like that, if this is a unique circumstance where we don't have any other properties similar in how we've evaluated or applied our criteria, that'd be one thing, but if we have it, would this be consistent application in other cases where we've assessed based upon that same scenario? If you understand what I'm saying. They don't have access, but there is, you know, an easement that provides that access.
Yeah, so we have several forms of discounts that we apply when a property doesn't have direct road access, or county road, or public road, or private road access. We have a trail access only, which would be like a four-wheeler or a hiking path. We have a lake access only discount, and we have a minimum maintenance road discount. This, I think we didn't apply any of those discounts because there's tire tracks there, and, you know, we don't look up. I'm sorry.
Oh, my
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
I'm sorry, can I finish? We don't look up the deeds for every parcel to see if there's an easement. We assume if there's tire tracks across a property, we assume that there's easement, that there's access there. And, you know, I'm not sure if someone's been trespassing on your property or if they're allowing you to access your property, but there are tire tracks going on
They've
there.
openly admitted to trespassing.
Yeah. Madam
So
Chair.
if you take out the 25 acres, then what's left of the 80? Then you've got,
Well, it's like 53 acres. I have it measured, did I have it measured out on this?
I don't know.
Yeah, 53 acres would be on the county road side of the river. And the remaining, you know, because there's 2 acres of river, 25 acres.
Then how do you appraise that?
Well, we could apply, like I said, we could apply a lax road access discount on it. I think that discounts at 20% on that acreage for the rate that's applied to the neighborhood. So it's a formula I would have to actually put into the computer to tell you what the number is going to come out to, but.
Commissioner Mills?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's important because I think it's important that we respect there is no legal easement at this point. Even if there are tracks there, it's not a legal access, and I think that's important to respect. And so I think it's also important to adjust that valuation, and you would know much better than me on how that goes, but I think that would be fair. As far as the rest of it is concerned, you know, I was going to say for better or worse, but I'll just say for worse. The land value is what the market, and that's not something we control. We have to comply, or else we get dinged $700,000 from the state. So we have to stay up to date on things, but we also have to be fair and reasonable. And so that's where I'm really leaning on that west side, right? Like, to be fair. And then on that east side, it's even if you're not going to develop it, that's what the market would do, and so that's what we have to do.
Similarly, Madam Chair, as I'm looking at this, and I live in this area, the fact that it's FAR 3, it's close to town, there's power there, it's plowed, makes it highly desirable. The only issue I see is the issue of the easement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree, and I think, as suggested by Bob, that reevaluating and applying the discount makes sense. I think that anything we do that could be perceived as a concession should be done with a basis of reasoning that supports consistency in that application. And so, as you've described to us, Bob, and you said that we have these discounts, and we read it this way, but that's why we allow, as Mr. White had said, for these meetings, so that the state says sometimes we don't get it right. And it's not because we didn't operate in good faith, we just apply the matrix, but we have a discussion, and I think that would be a good thing to do is to apply the discount.
So, when I apply the discount on the 25 acres, it values that unaccessible 25 acres or without access 25 acres at 65,400. So if you have a 25 acre parcel out in the woods with no road, that's what we would have it valued at. So that brings the total value to 388.5.
I feel comfortable with that. I don't.
Any other support?
I think that is what the reasonable discount we can apply. And like I said, for worse, that's what the market dictates.
No.
But I think it's important to recognize no legal easement and landlocked, as they say. It's unreachable. So.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. In participating in these Board of Appeals and Equalization in the past, we've had discussions like this, and we've dug in and rolled up our sleeves and tried to look at things, and then we submit our recommendations, and the state comes back and tells us, yes, we'll allow this, it seems reasonable, or no, it won't be reasonable. So, again, I think it's important for the public, and certainly the individuals that are affected are coming before the board to understand that we are stewards of what we've been entrusted with. We want to be reasonable within the context of what we're held accountable to, and in situations where we're not comfortable, like you're not comfortable, we need to advocate to try to have things changed on behalf of our people, to the extent we can do it. That's what we need to do. My personal, and I think certainly the board has expressed, is that consistency of application and understanding. Sometimes we might apply things or not allow for certain discounts or whatever, but we'll have the discussion and we'll try to be reasonable in the context of what's allowable for us. Our decisions then get forwarded and they either are approved or we have to go back and based upon our accountability.
And so part of the hurt here is the significant change, right? And that's because of the rotation, right? Of having a different section assessed every year and it not having been done in a while. That's why it jumped so much. Is my understanding.
The quintile every 5 years.
Yeah. So that's the ouch.
So, Madam Chair, it will require a motion to, on the second line here, board approve or board make a motion to that 388.5, was it?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd make a motion to adjust it to 388.5, given our discussion, for the easement.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion passes unanimously.
Do you have a second?
Yeah.
Gary? Commissioner Gamble? Thank you.
Thank you.
So this ends the folks who made an appointment to
Nope,
come.
we have one more appointment.
Oh, is there one?
Yeah,
Oh.
I'm sorry, blanking out. Kathleen Gaylord, and I believe she has someone with her today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, Commissioners and other members of the Board of Equalization and Appeals. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and to discuss the assessment that I just passed to the group. My name is Kathleen Gaylord. I'm a third-generation owner of parcel 53-215-2310 here in Cook County. The parcel is unimproved vacant land. Much of the land is swamp or wetlands. There are no improvements or shelters or cabins on this property, none. Okay? My 2025 notice evaluation listed an estimated market value of $74,300 with a property classification of rural vacant land. In early May, I received a revised valuation notice for 2025, which I'm appealing here tonight. That notice increased the estimated market value to $140,200, and it split the classification between rural vacant land and seasonal residential recreational, class 4C12. So I have two issues with the changed valuation notice. One is classification. I'm probably one of the first people to argue classification other than homestead before you, so let me try to walk through this. The split classification is wrong. There is no authority for using it in this situation. Class 4C12 is real and personal property devoted to non-commercial, temporary, and seasonal residential occupancy for recreational purposes. This parcel does not meet that definition. There are no improvements or structures on this parcel and no residential occupancy. It's vacant land. So I'm requesting that the classification of this property for tax purposes be corrected to rural vacant land, which is actually class 2B. That's one issue. Have a question about that?
I'll turn it over. Are you finished?
I have a valuation issue
Okay.
also. Do
I'll
want
give
me
you a
to-
few more minutes.
Okay, I'll do valuation issue. The revised valuation notice increases the assessment by $65,900 for improvements. As I've noted, there are no improvements on this parcel. I am requesting the removal of $65,900 assessment for non-existent improvements on parcel 53-215-2310.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, the reason for this updated valuation notice that changed the original valuation notice is when we were going through the quintile, we added cabins that were on Elbow Lake to a 1-acre parcel that seemed to be the closest privately owned parcel. We oftentimes see that our GIS lines are shifted. In fact, on Caribou Lake or Tate Lake, every parcel is completely shifted, one entire parcel, either north or south. So it's not uncommon to see that our GIS lines are not accurate, they're not surveys. So when we have a cabin like this on federal land and there's an adjacent private owner, we'll put it on that property. That property owner reached out to us and said, hey, I don't have any cabins. It's not mine, it's actually Mrs. Gaylord's who owns a property nearby. So we moved the cabin over to that record and sent out this notice thinking, oh, well, they'll let us know if it's not their cabins. So what I'm hearing today is that these are the Forest Service cabins, and that we should put them on that parcel, but that is not the case. Those cabins were built by the Gaylord family, correct?
I'm not talking about that area of, if you want to talk about the assessment of a different parcel, I can do that, and I would have to do that with you, Bob, but I am talking about the parcel that you assessed, property that isn't there.
So the photos that you provided me when you came in with two other folks, the photos of the cabin that we have on your assessment record, is that your brother's?
I'm not making that representation. I'm making the representation that it's not on this parcel. Okay, let me back up. Let me try to help Bob, because I've tried to help him 3 times. In the broader context of this area, there's a lot of problems, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with some of the problems that are here. Yes, my family does have improvements on federal forest land. We have never disputed that. The Forest Service knows, BLM knows, Cook County knows. Those are improvements that can't be assessed on a different parcel. You don't just pick up improvements and decide to put them on a different parcel. It doesn't work that way. And I don't know how to better say that. You tried to put them on my neighbor's parcel, and he properly objected, and I told him he should, because I said, those are not your cabins, you know that, and he shouldn't be paying taxes on them. It's very, very clear. These are improvements that are on parcel 53 215 1100. This is an area of, that was formerly known as Lot 4. It is now Lot 10, and I can explain all that if you need it, but it's a different parcel. So let me give you this.
So it would be helpful to have a map, because we have
There's a map.
nothing here other than the Gunflint Trail address. And it's kind of hard for us to visualize this piece of land without some type of,
Yeah,
More information.
that, okay, yeah. Your problem isn't the land. Your problem is the improvements on a different parcel.
Thank you.
And, okay, if you take a look at the, what I just handed out, we can go over that, and you will see that there is, look at the, where it says Lot 4, Lot 10, and there's a little sliver, on the lake shore, you'll see it's a 1.5 acre lot, okay? The cabins are not on the 1.5 acre lot. They were assessed on those last year. That was a mistake. This year, they were assessed on Lot 4. Where they sit is just south of that 1 acre cutout. That's where they are, which is Lot 10, okay, on your map. Lot 10 is property vested in the Forest Service, and it has a different parcel number. I've tried to explain, and I was hoping that the county attorney would be here, because well, all of these things are really basically legal arguments, but state law, property tax law, lists that when you have improvements on property that is vested in the United States, that property needs to be assessed as personal property. It should be, those improvements should be on the personal property tax roll to me. I've never received a personal property notice. I don't know what it looks like, but that is how Minnesota law tells you to handle this kind of a problem, because it is unique. I think Bob mentioned that he doesn't know that he's got any other property quite like this. So I understand that this is difficult, but it's very clear in state statute, it's personal property, not real property.
Madam Chair, if I could just ask Kathleen to restate your understanding of the law relative to the assessment when you were saying that improvements on government, if you'd kindly restate that.
I'll do better than that. I'll give you a little statute.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I got 3 here. Here's Kathleen.
so I guess I would say it's really important for us to have all this information ahead of time.
Well, I didn't intend to dispute the issue with regard to personal property assessment, for which I've not received, but I'm willing to do that to help. You know, I do think we want to get it right, and I do think we want to make sure that we're not assessing property that doesn't exist in places it certainly doesn't exist, because we don't know what to do. And I recognize that this is a unique situation, and I'm hoping that we can resolve it so it gets done right. Because you can't just keep putting these improvements on all the neighboring properties until somebody doesn't realize what happened and pays the tax. That's not an appropriate way to do it, so.
But maybe Bob could explain a little bit more what we're looking at here.
Yeah, and Kyle Munson is going to get some maps to show in relation to those property lines where the cabins sit. Effectively, it's been described, but for the most part by Kathleen correctly, that these cabins sit on Forest Service land. So the option I have is to add those cabins to the Forest Service property and then send them out an exempt application to see if they qualify for exemption.
No, we don't want them exempt. We want to pay the tax on them. Why would we want them exempt?
So what will happen is the Forest Service will get a property tax bill if they don't qualify for
Okay.
exemption.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure who's chairing this. Okay, Madam Chair, you've done this before. Cook County has put these properties on the Forest Service land. The Forest Service land says, and then there's a whole long history of this, and I don't know why. We've been very clear these improvements are our improvements. They're shown on maps from the 20s and 30s. I don't know why all of a sudden Cook County would like to claim that they don't know who the owner is. It's always been us. The problem is that it's not real estate. So I know you're used to dealing with real estate. This is personal property. It's a little different as a result.
Madam Chair, so we discovered these cabins, I think, in 2018, after our aerial flyover. Some point after our aerial flyover, we discovered the newest, biggest cabin. There's a smaller old log cabin, looks like it was probably built in the 30s to the 60s. I think I put in a effective age of 1930 because it looked like it's about at the end of its life. There's a much larger cabin on the parcel that you can see in that aerial overhead that showed up without a building permit. So, without a building permit, a cabin shows up, we try to find out who owns this thing, we send it out like we did. I mean, when Mrs. Gaylord is referencing a personal property record, that information either comes from the state or the feds. We have several Forest Service-owned parcels where they call them the summer home cabins up on Bearskin. There's the Gunflint properties on Gunflint Lake. There's a few other ones, like Hungry Jack Lodge. The lease information comes from the Forest Service to tell us, hey, these individuals have personal property on our land. What I believe we have here is different. I don't want to get into the details and specifics of how we ended up where we're at, but what I'm willing to do is I'm willing to put these onto the Forest Service parcels.
Well, you can't, because they're not real property, okay? Bob, please look at the state law. It's personal property. It doesn't belong on their assessment because here's the problem. On federal land, and I can dig out the next statute if county attorney obviously isn't here, you cannot put a lien on federal property for improvements that are on the property. Federal land does not accept a lien on their property. So they are not going to pay the tax on that property. There will not be a way to get a lien on that property if those taxes are not paid. You're supposed to tax the owner of the property. You're supposed to ask, who's the owner? You already know who the owner is. We've never hid that in, almost 70 years that we've owned this property. For many, many years, you assessed it to us, and then, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on why suddenly you don't know they're our property. We've never hidden it. You can see it on aerial photos, like I say, from the 20s and 30s. This is not.
Tax record showing it.
We've got tax records that'll show you exactly it. If you'd like, I can show you all kinds of field notes and cards and other things from Cook County about these particular improvements, because they've been there forever. At least, yeah, some of them. Yeah, from at least the 30s, maybe even the 20s.
Commissioner Mills?
I think I understand that the cabins are on lot 10.
Correct.
Your private property, your real estate is lot 4.
Correct.
The assessment placed the cabins on lot 4.
Correct.
And so I guess my question for Bob is, do we here tonight have any jurisdiction or anything on lot 10?
I mean, we could certainly add it to the list if we wanted to change the value of Lot 10 by adding improvements to it.
No, you
But that's-
can't, that's real estate.
Excuse me. That's, I think Lot 10 is owned by the Forest Service.
Correct.
Yeah. And so what we're discussing here tonight is Lot 4, right? Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Madam Chair, if I may, so the only difference between a personal property record and a real property record is we have a different sequence of PID numbers, and we typically don't value land on a personal property record. So I'm not going to create a personal property record for these cabins because I haven't gotten anything from the state or from the Forest Service to say that this property is being leased by the Forest Service to so-and-so.
It's not being leased, you know that.
So if somebody was to come in and tell me that they built a house on Forest Service land and they want a tax bill, I'm supposed to just send them that?
In this case, I think you are, and I will explain why if you'd like me to.
Well, Madam Chair,
Continue.
I'd really like to focus on Lot 4 here. And I think Lot 10 it's a much different, bigger conversation. And so, Bob, I think what you had said is you're very willing to take off the cabins from the Lot 4 assessment, correct? Would that change, or should we talk about classification as well, or would that change the class, and presumably that changes the assessed value?
Well, it would. So it would change that. Effectively, what you would end up having if you didn't address Lot 10 at the same time is you would have a cabin out there that's being used by somebody that's not being taxed.
And we're willing to pay the tax, but you haven't assessed us yet.
Commissioner Mills, are you?
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm still
we're
just-
processing, yeah.
Please, Commissioner Gamble can, take over here.
Well, I think you came in and mentioned that this is rather convoluted.
It is.
And so trying to understand it, there's been discussions, and you keep alluding to the fact that if we had our attorney here, and so the assessment, the cabins, the definitions usually are reinforced by precedent that comes out of challenges through court processes, so that we make sure that our individual understandings of terminology in the law is equally applied and equally understood.
Absolutely.
And so when challenged in similar situations, we find out in fact, and then future courts will use precedent in application in making a determination as to what it is. So I think so that we'll just say the emotion that comes out of both sides of the discussion can be diffused by identifying the issues at hand and separating them out and getting a clarification on our understanding based upon an attorney's interpretation. This is my perspective in listening to the discussion. So to move forward, I'd say we should make sure we're clear on our definitions so that we're applying them. Once we know the rules of the game, so to speak, now we can apply them based upon what we're responsible for doing. So I would say that if we can say, what we're calling into question is how we are understanding and interpreting the circumstance, given the fact that we have cabins on forest land with our parcel that is there. We, with our responsibility, have to assess buildings. And we need to understand the terminology with a court reinforced, an attorney reinforced, so that we can move forward with a clear understanding. That would be my assessment based upon the conversation.
All right, thank you, I appreciate it, Gary, and I appreciate your dialogue here. But let me just say, cabins is a strange term. And these are no longer what most people would consider cabins, they're sheds. Yeah, with one exception, a little bit newer one. But I have on that property a one-room log cabin that used to be a trapper, fisherman, maybe a logger. back in the 20s and 30s. I mean, it's a kind of a historic little thing that I've always thought was really, really cool. And this has been an area for my family since my grandparents bought it in 1958. We've planted trees, we've done all kinds of things in that area to make it, almost every storm up there knocks everything over because the soil, as you probably know, all around this county was less than a foot deep. I mean, I can remember as a little girl walking through the forest with my dad, and he walked up to a tree and he just pushed it over. I mean, there's very little soil there, but it has a great significance to me and my brothers, and so we have been fighting for this land, because if you look at that little map that I showed you, and you see Lot 4, and then you see Lot 10, our cabins are on Lot 10 because Lot 4 used to be on where 10 is. A survey by the federal government basically said, your property that you've been on for all these years is now back in the woods, in the forest, in the swamp. This is now federal land. We have worked with the BLM. We are working with the Forest Service now that, it's been a progression over many, many years, but everyone kind of just pushes it off because they don't quite know what to do. And if you've got suggestions of somebody else who's come before you that has dealt with this, I'd really appreciate that help.
Yeah. Madam Chair?
Yes.
Again, just listening to the conversation, and I think the important thing to have conversations to get it right.
Absolutely.
We can be frustrated, and consequently, that can sometimes encumber conversations in the ability to get it right. I think if we can correctly identify what has been with the different statements that have been the hang-up in this, because we're not necessarily understanding, because we have difference of understanding relative to interpretation or definition of things, what is or what is not a cabin, and historical or not, just the state has set some guidelines. When it's fuzzy, it usually gets challenged. When it gets challenged and there's a hearing, there's usually a determination which future similar situations, the result of that challenge defines for people that are in situation with fuzzy stuff where we go from there. And so
can I ask a question
Sure.
quickly? I mean, so are you saying it's okay to do it wrong so that somebody
No,
will challenge it?
I'm not saying. I'm saying it sounds to me in the discussion, and part of it is that we're using terminology, which Bob had just said when we're talking about, different things. I think we need to be sure that we understand the things that direct us, the structure in which conversations can have. And one of the hang-ups seems to be an interpretation of definition based upon state statute or what you've given to us here. And so I'd say, and you, again, referred to the fact if we had our attorney here, our attorney hopefully would give us a response, which I'm assuming attorney might know, but the attorney is in the position, relatively new here, so she would probably take it under advisement and get that answer. Whatever it takes, our commitment is wanting to get it right and to follow an ethical and in a good faith procedure to make sure that we understand.
Okay.
And then, at that point, when we're clear on it, that we make a decision. But it is a disciplined process that rules out some of the frustrations that come because we have misunderstandings. And there are going to be situations like that. Let's see if we can identify the concerns, bullet point concerns.
Okay.
And then let us take that and try to address it, given our stewardship responsibility, and then find out how we deal with it. But we better start out with an clear understanding of terminology, so we are subjectively trying to apply it,
Okay.
and it looks like we're not being responsible.
Can we agree that the cabins are not, and cabins is not my term, it's yours, I say improvements, are not on the current Lot 4?
Well,
They're on the former Lot 4, but they're not on the current Lot 4, which you're assessing with this parcel.
Yeah, again, if you say, here's our contentions relative to this and why we came before, if you say that, I would defer, to Bob, who represents our department relative to assessing, so that we gain that. We're sort of arbitrator of the process, And I'm just saying, list the things, and then let's look at, and let's get a legal opinion. Let's look if there's similar situations so we can apply that equally and equitably. That would be my recommendation.
Maybe I need to ask the question of Bob. Bob, are these cabins that you are assessing on Lot 4?
My response to that is that I've seen older maps and I've seen the newer maps. My understanding is that you were pursuing with the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service to try and undo the resurvey, is effectively what I was to understand, is that you are in the process of redefining the real estate you own, which was previously adjacent to Elbow Lake.
So the answer is yes, those properties are not on Lot 4?
I'm not a surveyor. I haven't seen
Oh,
a
Bob.
survey.
Oh,
I
Bob.
can't tell you where those cabins are.
You know this, because you're trying to put it on forest land. Why are you trying to put it on forest land if it's on Lot 4?
So, Madam Chair, I guess, I don't know what the resolution to this is, but my understanding is that in the past, they were under the impression that they owned the shoreline on Elbow Lake. They had an older cabin there. In 2018 or somewhere around there, between 2012 and 2018, when it showed up on our aerials, a cabin was built without a county permit. And at some point, since the 3 generations, a resurvey was done. And now the Forest Service is claiming ownership to that part of the shoreline of Elbow Lake. But what I was told a couple of weeks ago is that they were working with an attorney, that they were trying to go through the motions to get the ownership of the shoreline back. So in the meantime, there are cabins out there that if we don't have them somewhere, they're untaxed cabins that are being used for recreational purposes.
Can you put them on the personal property tax roll?
No.
And then it's all taken care of? That's the answer.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Mills?
I was wondering if you could maybe explain some of the other situations with personal property on federal land.
Yeah, so it would be like, the Bearskin Lake, East Bearskin Lake, Gunflint Lake.
Well, just how
Hungry
does that work?
Yeah, so we have communication with the Forest Service on who owns those. When those change out ownership, they file paperwork with the Recorder's Office, or the Forest Service will reach out to us and let us know that there's been a change of ownership. Those don't have deeds. I think they file a patent on those. So, those are set up with the Forest Service, in cooperation with the Forest Service, that, they tell you the defined area that you have to build in and all of those specifics. What we have here is what appears to be that's.
Well, can I pause you
Yeah.
there? So, when those agreements are in place, then we tax the
Structure.
personal property.
Correct.
Okay, and that's done through the Forest Service?
Correct.
Or-
Well,
okay.
they define the area that we then identify what the improvements are within that area.
Okay. And,
They even have, it looks just like a survey when they do those.
and so they initiate, or how is that initiated?
Well, I haven't had communication with them in some years, but we did at one point get an entire list of all of the owners and all of the leases that were in place and all of that. In fact, I can try and dig it up, but it's been several years. It was when I was working up the Gunflint in 2018.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, except there's no lease here. And a survey, you don't survey a piece of a building.
I'm sorry, I think you misunderstood me. Up at the sites where there are leases, they draw out a survey. Effectively, it's the same thing as a survey saying, you're leasing this area, you're leasing this area, you're leasing this area. So it looks like a survey, but it is a lease on federal
But here
property.
there is no lease.
Correct, I know, I'm fully aware.
So if you can get past the lease thing, what do? You tax it as personal property. So we're just saying you should be taxing this as personal property like that. I don't understand why that is not a reasonable solution to an odd problem.
Commissioner White?
Well, so you have cabins. Initially, they were on your property, but now now there's not your property.
Well, it's in dispute.
It's a dispute, and so.
We have a
You
claim
do
of-
not have
we
a
have-
lease for this, so
No.
it doesn't fit anything.
We don't intend to have a lease on this. We have filed an application for claim of title, and at one point, the instruction to the BLM was to issue a patent for the land to us, for Lot 10.
Commissioner Gamble?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, one of the things I was thinking, and this goes back to a statement that Commissioner Mills made early on, we talked about this parcel not having any structures on it, Lot 4. And my recommendation would be that we go ahead and deal with the assessment with Lot 4 without any property, and that then we begin to work on and with the Forest Service to determine what to do with parcel 10, or Lot 10.
Commissioner Mills?
I like that idea. A question I had was about, and forgive me for not having a good example, but say one of the leases up the Gunflint built an accessory. How does that work from your end?
You know, I guess we would, my appraisers would go through the same motions of measuring it and adding it to the assessment, and I'm not sure that Land Services has jurisdiction, I assume they do. But they do also have to get permits on those through the Forest Service
Right,
as
right.
well.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah, okay.
Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So under the scenario that Commissioner Sullivan is proposing, we would draft that language as the board in our consideration, and it would be sent to the state. And we would provide to them all the particulars relative to our recommendation. And they would look at it, and they would probably come back and say, what are you doing with this component of it? I'm just making an assumption there. We could put the narrative that would say, given the lack of clarification relative to definition and equal application, with that understanding definition, we are taking that under advisement for clarification, but in the meantime, we're going to take this action and see what they say.
I'm sorry, what action is that you're taking? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Well, if the action is to say, let's just look at this property without the improvements are there, we're not going to assign that. That's what I
Not
understand.
going to put
You're
value on
not going to put
those.
value on.
For the Lot 4 on your map.
Correct.
We're just going to look at lot 4. We're not going to talk about the cabins.
So you can't assess buildings that aren't there.
Right.
And that because of that, you're obviously going to, the classification will switch back to the way it was in the original appraisal.
Because we think that this
Or
process, that there's lack of clarity and a misunderstanding, because we need to be sure we're clear, because our responsibility is to make sure that buildings, in fact, are attributed to somebody for taxation. That's our responsibility.
So, that being the thing, why wouldn't you just do a personal property tax bill to me? Why can't
Because
you
we
give that
don't,
to me?
Not
because we don't know what that is. This is why the clarification of equal application. If something comes before us that we don't have familiarity with, we want clarification. It's the same thing as this discussion without an attorney's opinion. All we're saying is we're
It's
committing.
really simple. Don't
It's
worry,
real simple?
It's very
Yeah,
simple.
it is by your definition, ma'am.
Yeah, it's very simple.
Yeah, by your definition. We just need, because of our stewardship responsibility, because if we make a decision, it is precedent. That decision needs to be equally applicated to everybody that in your circumstance would come before us. That is fair application of the rule of law. And we're just saying, let's make sure we get it right by clear understanding of how this has been interpreted in other situations. That's why we will have, sometimes we say, we don't have enough information to make a decision that protects our values. Therefore, we're saying, let's get that information so we do get it right. That's our commitment to you, and that's our commitment to our stewardship
I'm just trying to
responsibility.
help you get it right.
I know that, and we're trying to make sure we get it
That's what I'm
right.
attempting to do, and I'm not just, somebody off the street. I have a whole long list of credentials in property taxation and in the classification system. I've been an advisor to the Department of Revenue and to the Minnesota Legislature on these kinds of issues. I'm not just,
Well, and
somebody
I'm
who
not
doesn't
claiming,
know what they're talking
I'm
about.
not claiming that, but then you should have appreciation for the fact that we want to get it right, as we are stewards, and as
And I
you,
have no problem with your asking the question of what do you do? I do have a problem with sending it to my neighbor as, to be paid, or sending it to the Forest Service to be paid. because
that's what we're
not
trying to
appropriate.
resolve. That's what we're trying to resolve, because
appropriate.
it's getting rid of the thorn in the flesh,
Thank you.
yeah.
Do you have another comment?
So, Madam Chair, I want to pose the question to Mrs. Gaylord. Are you pursuing ownership of that land currently through the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management?
Yes.
So, on one side of the situation, you're saying that's my land, and over here, you're telling the board
I'm
that's
saying
not
it
my
used to be
land.
my land, and we're trying to get at least that area where those improvements are,
And then
back into family ownership.
a follow-up question.
Okay.
The value we have on that. If we were to put a $140,000 value on a personal property record, would that satisfy your appeal?
Absolutely not.
Because I can tell you, you cannot buy even a Forest Service leased property for $140,000. So one way or another,
Okay.
this property should be taxed.
I asked you how you did personal property assessments. You told me they're the same. You do it kind of pretty much the same way you do real property assessments. And the assessment that you put on Lot 4 is $65,900. So absolutely, if you give me a personal property tax for $65,900, we'll go forward. But if you suddenly decide that all of the value of Lot 4 plus all of the value of the improvements now needs to be put in a personal property role, no, that is not accurate, and that does not get it right.
I think we'll return to Commissioner Sullivan and her proposal.
So, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we assess this property, and this would be property ID 53-215-2310, without the value of the structures, so as rural vacant land.
And correct the classification to 2B rural vacant land. Thank you.
Support.
Any comments or questions? Commissioner Mills?
Thank you. So, I support that, clearly. And then, and perhaps this is stretching too far for tonight, would it be appropriate to have personal property taxed at 65.9? Yeah.
I won't issue a personal property record. I've been specifically told by the Department of Revenue that I can't just create personal property records at my discretion, so.
I appreciate that.
This action will be reviewed, as they all are, by the state. So, the state will determine whether or not this is the right cause of
All
action.
right, great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner White?
Well, then my understanding is the state will look at this and say, well, why didn't you tax those improvements or the buildings, or, did they compensate you for taking a chunk of your property away?
Did they compensate me for taking all this lakeshore property, I don't know,
Yeah.
1,000 feet of lakeshore, and putting me back in the swamp? No.
Huh.
Did they compensate me for the improvements that were on the property that they now claim as theirs? Zero.
Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not comfortable with the motion as it stands, just in the language as its limitation, because in the discussion, from my perspective, what our commitment is a commitment to trying to get this right with the misunderstanding that exists. But as a good faith measure, we are willing to assess it as it is just Lot 4 without the improvements. So what we're doing this, it is a holding place while we get a determination legal relative to our total obligation. So I'm comfortable with a motion that says, in good faith, we will do this contingent upon a definition and clarity as to equal application of the law relative to our responsibility. Because if we make a motion without that contingency, then if I were in your position, I'd say, well, wait a minute. You just passed this and now you're back at it again. I think it has to be contingent. We're doing this in good faith, but we want to get it right, and therefore, let's make sure it's equal application of the rule of law by clearly defined definitions with legal opinion. So we'd like to refer it to legal opinion. So the motion would be that, as, has been made and seconded, that I would, a friendly amendment, suggest that contingent upon a review, so clarity to make sure that we meet our obligation as responsible.
Can I show you this map, just real quick?
Excuse me just a minute. Commissioner Mills, you look perplexed.
Oh, I do not
Yeah.
see this resolving quickly. I can imagine it moving, and then we'll have to address it again. But I think as things are now, this is how it is. But I do believe there will be more.
And I would agree with
It's
that.
just, I don't
I'll
want to
agree,
make
too.
any contingencies. I'm not comfortable with contingencies right now because we have to address what's right in front of us. And
That
then-
is the way I feel.
Madam
So
Chair.
The motion is not contingent on anything.
Okay, yeah, Madam Chair, I was going to say the only way that we could really do that is if the contingency is looking to the 26 assessment, or that we are recessing and reconvening this meeting before the end of the month. So I know, just to clarify, if we're saying that the board's motion is to remove the improvements from Lot 4 parcel record, and then continue on to look to the 26 assessment for resolve, that's...
Madam Chair?
I would agree with that, with the understanding, and it should be as a matter of record, that we agreed to this for the 2025, and it would be revisited for 2026. I would agree with that.
So do we have that clarification now?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
I just have a question. How long have you been working on this with the Forest Service?
The application went in fall of 1986. No, 83. 83.
Okay, you'll hear us in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify one thing? I don't know why Bob said he didn't know that where these cabins were. You know, he showed you this aerial photo. I don't know.
We have that?
They're right up, they're on the lake, near the lake shore right there.
Yeah,
Okay, and you can clearly see lot 4 is over here.
right, sure.
You know, here's the lot,
On your
here's
map,
the-
because it wasn't on here,
it would be right there.
okay, all right,
It's the county's fault.
yeah,
So
yeah.
clearly they're not on lot 4.
No, I understood that because you said it was just south of that private parcel, so.
Okay,
very
thank you.
much.
This ends our appointments. Do we have-
We have a walk-in, and in the past, we have allowed the walk-in to come up and speak.
Would you like to come forward?
But I apologize for that.
You could come over here to where the microphone is, please.
Apologize for not getting on the agenda. I'm probably coming in to talk to Bob.
And you will give us your name, and I'll give you 5 minutes.
Okay, David Berglund. I actually came tonight to represent Ken Rindall on behalf of his conversation and his concerns. And I'll just quickly talk about that, and then I've got to bring up something about myself. Bob, you took pictures of their property overlooking my farm, showing Lake Superior. I don't think you can assess his property based on that.
It's from the road.
Yeah, it was taken from the road, and if you get in on the Rindall property, you won't get that same view. And you do get a view of that property because there's a farm there and there's pasture and open land only. This winter, we're gonna cut 80 acres of dead balsam and spruce. That's gonna open up that view greater. Can you assess their property or my property on the fact that we're gonna have a greater view of Lake Superior?
We value it based on what the market's willing to pay.
Yeah, all right. I have just one You know, I apologize for you people not having this in front of you. I've got proposed market value of 160 acres, just one of my parcels, at almost $1 million for next year. Guys, I have to tell you, I'm a farmer. My family's been here since 1886. I'm the last dairy farmer in Cook County. I don't value my farm. I know the county does differently than I do, but I don't value my farm as a market value based on other properties in Cook County. Lake Superior, I've been looking at that since I was a kid. My family's been looking at that since the 1800s. It's beautiful. My farm happens to overlook Lake Superior. I've got just one parcel here, 152 acres roughly. Next year's proposal of $942,000. What in the world?
There's a house on that parcel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
660,000 for that property. This is
Land.
just a piece of farm property. I know you value it as maybe developed property or comparing it to some other property in Cook County overlooking Lake Superior. But guys, this farm isn't for sale. It's gonna stay in the family forever. I'm gonna try to hold on to this dairy farm. My kids are gonna try to hold on to this dairy farm, and their kids. And you heard Mr. Rindall tonight talk pretty much the same thing. I have actually been farming the Rindall farm since I was a little boy. My family's been farming that farm for 80 years. That was a farm. And he indicated tonight that he's gonna put it back into agriculture. So I came a little unprepared, but I'm just looking at these assessments for next year. I'm not a ski hill. I'm not Lutzen. I'm not a developer. I'm not developing this farm. Can we just somehow take a look at that and base this one last dairy farm in Cook County agriculturally? Somehow take it back to what land values were years ago when it was assessed as a farm? I'm not a resort. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly or if you're understanding what I'm saying, but it just doesn't seem right. Gee, if I bought this property 10 years ago and it's just for an investment, I get it. No problem. It just really wouldn't be a problem. We just adjust it, sell it, make a few bucks and move on and do it over again. I don't do that. I try to save farmland, try to keep it going. I hope that this community appreciates that there's somebody that's still trying to hang on to a family farm and keep it going like there's any farms left. And some would say, oh, the Berglund, this isn't farmland up here. I've made it. My grandpa did, my great-grandfather did. I'm currently running 120 head of cattle right now. We milk 35 cows. We supply food to this community. I could go on and on, but please just take a look at that.
Thank you. We'll have Bob comment.
So the one comment I have is that, from what I understand, you haven't signed up for the Green Acres program, have you?
And I won't.
Yeah. We did send out letters to all the agricultural properties, and Green Acres is created by the state of Minnesota, a special program to say, we don't want farmers losing their farm. We're gonna tax them at a much lower rate. In fact, it would take this from $4,400 an acre to $800, or I think it's $900 an acre, something like that, $1,000 an acre. The land value would be cut by quite a bit.
But you'd have to sign up for Green Acres to do that.
Yeah,
Is
and if
that
you, like
fair?
you say, you don't ever plan on selling it, then there really shouldn't be a risk. I mean, I don't wanna say there's never a risk, but the program is that once you sell or no longer farm, there's a payback of 3 years.
I understand that.
Yeah. So I think it might be something, I lived on Westerland's farm, and I told Roger, I said, Roger, you gotta sign up for this because I don't want you to get the tax bill you're about to get without Green Acres. He signed up for it. I mean, I wouldn't steer you in the wrong direction. I think most of the larger farms, like, the syrup farm, I think all the ones that qualified with the acreage and the farming operations signed up except for you.
I just don't like the fine print that's behind that.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get into that here at this meeting, but
I understand.
there's troubling parts to that.
Yeah, and whenever it comes up with legislation discussing changes to the program, because some county doesn't know how to apply it correctly, I mean, I can see where it is. When I told Roger, I considered that. I said, Roger, there's always a risk. But if you plan on owning this thing anything longer than 3 years, there's gonna be an advantage to the Green Acres. I mean, there's also senior property tax deferrals. There's other programs for people who have owned and homestead a property for many, many years so that they don't lose them. And you know, there are a couple of options out there. I mean, when I look at 160 acres at 660,000 up on that hill, it's probably worth more than that. And I know Roger got letters in the mail from developers and other people who were interested, and they were $1 million offers. I mean, one after another.
I don't dispute that. I totally understand that. I get it. I just wish that it could be looked at as just a simple farm without the Green Acres.
Yeah. And unfortunately, in the tax system, I don't have a lever to pull for you. So, you know, I hear what you're saying, and I understand it, and, you know, I don't know. I mean, agriculture, they have really low rates on the homesteaded agriculture. You know, the tax rate, really, when we raise anyone's value, the county doesn't get any more money. And I want everybody to fully understand that it's not me saying, hey, you should pay more. It's me saying that in the whole algorithm of real estate and the value of these properties, we're trying to do our best to get it so that everyone's paying their fair share. Now, when you have a property that dropped, the value got cut by more than in half in 2016, and now we're making up that difference in a quintile review, it really hits people hard. I wish it had been more smooth transition, but we have these areas of the county or certain situations that came up where values were reduced, and they probably shouldn't have been.
So Bob, do you have a recommendation?
The only recommendation I have is that you look into Green Acres. I mean, I know there's a risk with it, but I can assure you, I'm on the legislative committee with the assessors, and anytime like they're talking about, oh, we're gonna change this or we're gonna change that, the assessors come forward and say, hey, you're gonna do this to somebody. You're gonna do this to this group of people. If they were ever talking about Green Acres, I would imagine that they're going to make it so that there is no, you know, 3-year payback. Like, if they did away with the program, let's say. I don't think they're gonna make everybody in the state who was in the program pay that back, but, you know, that's personally my recommendation to my landlord, who was a farmer, was to enroll in Green Acres, because it's designed specifically to protect somebody who has an old homestead and a lot of acreage in an area like this.
So why do we need the government involved to protect an old-fashioned piece of property? That's my point. It just doesn't seem right. I get the program, but I mean, can't we just go back to?
Property taxes were part of the agreement when homesteads were being claimed. You know, I mean, property taxes were inherent with getting the land.
But were there property taxes when they homesteaded back in the 1800s?
There were taxes in Minnesota before Minnesota got statehood.
What year was that?
1858, well.
1858.
I know that one. Questions or comments, Commissioner Campbell?
Thank you. Yeah, you know, if you get a few years under your belt, it's hard not to become nostalgic, but especially when we see change that affects us in a way that we're not happy with it. The legislature ran into a lot of issues on this whole real estate thing, and I forget the year that it was, that they concentrated on focusing on making sure that there was uniformity within the state, meaning all 87 counties, because you could have, let's just say as an example, Lake County that applied tax law one way, property tax, and we applied another, and it became competitive. And the state realized it was the problem, so they said, we're going to focus on this issue and create uniformity. The farm is largely our heritage within the state of Minnesota, so we need to protect in this discussion our farms, and thereby there was much discussion to create the Green Acre option. I would say because of the history that's existed in that regard, that you would be able, relative to the fine print issue, anything that we're not familiar with, but we just sort of have life experience that casts our assumptions on top of, you know, everything relative to why do we have government? Well, government's responsibility is to be an umbrella of protection so that we can live our lives under the freedom that's provision in a republic. And in the context of the provision that is there with the Green Acres, I would say we've had enough history on that to ask the questions of people that have been part of the program and see, here's the benefits, here's the risks. And we've had discussions about carrots that we grab, and then they're linked to something, and we find out, whoops, there's a surprise here. But that's our responsibility to ask those questions. And many times, governments, other entities will use something that's attractive, hoping you don't understand what the obligation is on the other end. And I've been in situations where I say, no, thank you. There's a handout here, but I don't like what comes with it. So I say no. But we have enough history. This is something new. And so I would say that you heard the numbers. The benefit is there. You just need to evaluate at what cost. And there should be people that I think, in talking with people within the farming industry, that can answer that question for you. And hopefully you'd be comfortable to be able to take that advantage so that you can keep the farm for the family.
So, Mr. Berglund, it sounds like maybe in another year, after you've looked at that particular program and kind of get your papers together, you can come back before the board and see where you might be in another year.
Well, I can talk to Bob, we can take a look at that.
Yeah, we certainly can. And I, like I said, there's always a risk with it, but I do think that if the legislature was ever going to do something that would eliminate the program, that they would eliminate that 3-year payback requirement. Because the idea of the 3-year payback was that either you stopped farming or you sold it. So if you sell it, you got a big payday, and you're going to be able to cover the 3-year payback. If it no longer qualifies, it means you stopped farming it, and, then I don't know what that situation looks like.
We can take a look at the fine print.
Yeah.
I have before, and I don't like it, but we can look at it again.
Yeah. And Madam Chair, I'd just say, to David, that I'm certainly willing to help you on the end of vetting the program. So.
No, we'll get together. Apologize for not talking earlier. I've been so busy, I got caught off guard with all this.
Yeah.
No apology needed.
Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you for listening. Yes.
Is there any other business?
The only other business we have is on the sheet with the grid here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 assessor recommendations. That these are things that have occurred within the last 10 days, and because of that window of the last 10 days, we have to put it on the board agenda as a formal action. So really, you can make one single motion to approve the list of assessors' recommendations, or you can go through them one by one, however you prefer.
Commissioner Gamble?
Madam Chair, I'd make that motion to approve the assessor's recommendation.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And as of 8:08, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your indulgence here, but I just think, and certainly on behalf of the board, Bob, we appreciate your good work. And it's challenging, especially when it affects people's pocketbooks, and you can get wore out going through processes that are demanding. But the brand that we put on the county is dependent upon good people protecting what we are about, which is trying to be servants, but still compliant with our responsibilities, and sometimes it's not a very grateful position. But I appreciate the work you do and the spirit in which you do it, and I hope that as we move forward in a lot of different areas, that we can build a trust relations that demonstrates that we work hard at trying to be good stewards at what we do. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
And we are adjourned, and to all your staff. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, guys.
Thanks for saying that, Gary. It has hard to believe how hard your job is.
You didn't get to adjourn.